everyone. I hope you're well. Very sorry for the big delay on this stream tonight. As you can see, I'm by myself at the moment. Well, I'm not. I've actually got Robin on the phone with me here. I've got two mobiles in front of me. We've had a lot of issues getting this started tonight, as you can probably imagine, if you've been waiting. But Robin, fair play to him. He's really, really tried. And I've just come up with the idea now. We've had no luck, unfortunately, but we're going to do an audio only stream. So I'll introduce Robin in a second. I've been doing live streams again recently. This will just be an audio one tonight. I've had Ben Aston and Mark the last couple of weeks. Please check those videos out if you like this sort of stuff, if you're into politics, current affairs. And yeah, this will be an audio only stream. We'll see how it goes. Hopefully, if people can comment in the chat if the audio is fine when Robin starts speaking as well. And yeah, we'll see how it goes. Robin, thank you very much for joining us tonight. Can you just give yourself a quick introduction, please?
Yes, well, thank you very much for having me on. And yes, I agree. We've had troubles getting on at all. So I'm Robin Tilbrook. I'm the chairman of the English Democrats and also chairman of the Workers of England Union. And I'm a solicitor.
Very good, very good. So, Robin, I've been aware of the English Democrats for quite some time now. But for people not aware of your organisation, can you give a brief overview of what the party stands for and its principal beliefs?
Yes, so I mean, we are a campaigning English nationalist party. We could see that Scotland and Wales and to some extent Northern Ireland were getting their own First Minister, government and parliaments, and we thought something similar ought to happen for England. We were, I think, felt that when we realised that the British establishment politicians didn't want to do anything for England, and in fact wanted to break England up into so-called regions, we thought that actually we needed a party that would campaign against that and try and stick up for England. And we've been doing that now since we launched in August 2002. Initially we were campaigning for a First Minister, Parliament and government for England with at least the same powers as the Scottish ones within a federal UK. We then found that what Conservative politicians in particular were saying to us was that England was too big to have its own parliament, which sounded pretty odd when you think of, say, France, for example. But nevertheless, that's what they would say. And they would also say that we shouldn't talk about England because that was all a bit of a threat to the UK, they were saying. And in fact, William Hague went so far as to say that English nationalism, he said, was the worst form of all nationalisms. That was partly because he reckoned that if people thought of themselves as English in England, then we would be headed towards the situation where the UK would break up. And so what we've now really got to is a point where the British establishment wants to break up England. And in fact, Gordon Brown has authored another set of constitutional proposals, which Keir Starmer signed up to before the general election, in which England would be broken up into regions, and they have a blueprint for trying to make that impossible to reverse. So if the British establishment is allowed to do what they want to do, they will break up England and make it so that England can't be reassembled, and that I think would be rather a shame when you bear in mind that we're at a point not far short of the 1100th anniversary since England was completely unified under King Athelstan on the 12th of July 927 AD. So I feel I've got a big job here with trying to preserve England's future. And the future of the English nation, and it's important to have a party that's campaigning for that.
So that's very interesting because with Wales, with Scotland and with Northern Ireland, you do have devolved parliaments. You have Plaid Cymru, the SNP. and then obviously Northern Ireland's a unique place with your Unionist and your Republican parties. Um, as far as I'm concerned, when you speak to everyday people, English independence in the same regard is not at the forefronts of their mind in the same way it is with the other nations in the United Kingdom. So, where does the desire come from for English independence, as you say, from your point of view?
So when we were campaigning for, in effect, a federal UK with England having its own parliament, what we were getting was first of all, it's a complicated concept, and people couldn't easily understand it on the doorstep, and you tended to spend the entire maximum sort of 15 minutes on the doorstep when you're canvassing, explaining the concept, whereas people quickly and easily understand English independence. Um, Secondly, of course, you have got this threat that the British political establishment have been trying to break up England. In fact, another quote I sometimes use is of Charlie Kennedy, who was then the leader of the Lib Dems, and he said he supported regionalisation in England because, as he said, it's calling into question the idea of England itself. So there is a concerted plan to try and break up England. The only problem for them has been the people who want to break up England is where the boundaries of these so-called regions should be, because of course there is no historic element or cultural element to the regions. Um, they are new inventions. Our counties in England were the closest we get to sort of regional government, and obviously people have a strong attachment to their counties, and in some cases to their towns and cities. But they don't have a strong attachment to the idea of a region. I mean, I live in Essex, and nobody's really thought in terms of any identity or loyalty or anything like that of the East of England region. I mean, that's just a sort of bureaucratic concept, and but it is actually much more of a real threat, and people are aware of. I think also there's another issue, which is that many English people are accustomed to talk about Britain and the UK and England as if it was all one.
Sure.
Whereas they haven't sort of fully woken up to the fact that Scots people mostly feel Scottish and Welsh people mostly feel Welsh, and they think it's pretty peculiar that the English don't think of themselves as English necessarily.
Why do you think that is? Because if, for example, just from the top of my head, if you look at old footage of when England won the World Cup back in the 60s, even though it was England playing, it would be Union Jacks all around Wembley. That's not the case when England play anymore. It's St George's flags. I don't really think you tend to see Union Jacks at England games anymore. But why is that the case in your opinion? Because I definitely agree that the Welsh would see themselves as Welsh before British, the Scots the same. But if you asked an Englishman their nationality, their background, they'd probably say British rather than English. So why do you think that is?
I think that you can't understand that without all the propaganda in the Second World War from the BBC. I mean, they deliberately set out to try and create this mindset in England that people were British and not necessarily English. And that sort of attitude is very much continuing within the official state system. So, I mean, for instance, when Labour were last in, they created a Ministry of Culture and Sport. And one of the objectives of the Ministry of Culture and Sport was to make sure that no further England teams were created. So we had, for instance, a strange spectacle of a cycling competition in which there was a Scottish team, a Welsh team, an Irish team, and a British team. And obviously, the English cyclists were expected to cycle under the British team.
So sorry, was there no England team in that instance?
No.
Oh, okay.
Because, as I say, the Ministry of Culture and Sport had basically orchestrated it so that there wouldn't be an England team.
But what would be you're saying there's certain groups that want to break up England into regions. What would be the aim, the benefit of doing that for these groups?
So it's not so much groups. It is political groups. I mean, the Lib Dems, for example, they often campaign as, for instance, the Yorkshire Party. They would campaign for putting Yorkshire first, even though the Yorkshire that they're talking about isn't actually the traditional Yorkshire at all. It includes bits of Lincolnshire, for example, and quite a lot of Yorkshire's missing. Because what they're campaigning for, in fact, are these official regions. They're not. They're not actually completely independent of politics. I think ordinary people are just sort of not very. They haven't really sort of thought about it very much. So, for instance, I would often talk to people about the fact that because we haven't got any political representation, um, England's interests are often treated as being really quite um, uninteresting to the British political establishment. They use England as a cash cow. And we get situations like, obviously, the Barnett formula, where there is this huge subsidy for Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, where out of English taxpayers' money, and you get a strange situation where people in very poor areas of England get a less subsidy than people in the rich areas of Scotland. But the sort of easy to understand on the doorstep type of issue would be prescription charges. Prescription charge now in England is nearly £10 per prescription, and in Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, it's free. And the reason it's free is basically because English taxpayers subsidise it and pay for it to be free in Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland. People don't really sort of register these type of issues in England, and I do feel that we're sort of back to G.K. Chesterton saying, "What do they of England know who only England know?" In other words, people don't really sort of take any notice of what's happening elsewhere in the world other than in England when they're thinking about these things.
No, there's some fair points raised there. I guess what I would say to that is nowadays, with crime, with the cost of living, with illegal immigration, the NHS, I would say people would have those sort of core issues at the top of their list of priorities. Whereas English identity or English independence, whatever you want to call it, wouldn't be as high on that list. So, what have you and your organisation done since I think the past 20 years or so, you said, to try and shift the attention towards this matter?
Well, one of the things we've done, of course, is we stood in lots of elections and we've used the electoral process to distribute a great many leaflets. We reckon we've distributed nearly 60 million leaflets so far. And to the extent that you have people aware of what we're talking about, I think we've contributed to that awareness quite a lot. People may not be fully conscious of our contribution, but I think it has permeated through somewhat, and certainly we don't find that people are completely unaware. So I mean, very often when I'm campaigning and knock on a door, somebody will start telling me about the Barnett formula. And really, when I push back to find out how they found out about it, it very often does come back down to one of our leaflets that's triggered their interest, and they've then looked into it.
It's because I think the one that comes to my mind would be tuition fees for the Scots.
Yes.
Obviously, Scots go for free, and from memory, anyone in the EU can go to Scotland from free. I don't know if that's still the case today, except for is it the English? I don't know about Wales, but I know that the English can't go to Scotland for free. I don't know if you've got more of an insight on that.
Definitely, that's right. Although I don't think the people from the EU could now go to Scotland for free. Um, that was when we were still in the EU.
Yeah, so I'm showing my age here because I went to uni back in 2013. So yeah, before Brexit. Yeah. So
Did you go to university in Scotland?
no, I didn't. I went in England in the end.
Yes.
Yeah, like you say, I mean, if it had been free, probably would have tried harder. But well, of course, when it's not, the attraction obviously diminishes. So no, that's
It is. I think we are making some progress. I mean, just to take one thing that seems like it's sort of not going in the right direction in one sense, but it is in another. That sounds contradictory, and of course it is. But if you look at the last two national census results on national identity, in 2012, they asked for the first time whether people thought they were English, and they put as one of the highest options English only
okay.
as your view. And at that point, over 65% of the people in England said that they were English only. And that horrified the British political establishment. So this time, in the last one, the option for English only was buried right, and there was official discussion about this. They buried it deliberately right down at the bottom of the list, almost. And the interesting thing, from my point of view, is that although we wound up with a lot less numbers of people saying that they were English only, there was still a core of people who were prepared to go right down the list until they got to English only and sign up to that. And slightly encouragingly, the numbers of people in England who signed up to being English only are a greater number than the people that across the whole of the UK that voted for this Labour government.
Right. Okay. That's interesting. Well, no,
So if we could once get that support coalesced into electoral support, we could well be on our way, as it were.
no, understandably. You talked about English only there, so we've got a nice, easy question for you here, Robin. Um, who are the English, and who do you and your party deem to be the English? Is it in an ethnic sense? Is it in a civic sense? What would you define as an English man or woman?
We have got a carefully explained, I hope, definition on our website in our manifesto. We basically followed a similar line to what the law says, actually, because English is been found in a case against the BBC in Scotland as that the English are a racial group. And also an ethnicity, as people would talk about. But it's also a question of identity, which is you identifying yourself as that. And in those senses, all three of those are equally the kind of approach that would be adopted to decide whether you were Scottish, Welsh, Irish, or other national identity. So the English are just as much a national identity as any other nation on earth, and indeed, the English are actually one of the oldest nations on earth, arguably the oldest, in fact.
So you mentioned there racial, ethnic, and I think the third one was it identity? Sorry,
National identity.
national identity. So
The law talks about national origin, national identity.
so in your party's view, does that mean that in a racial sense that only white people can be English?
Well, obviously, historically, you would certainly be saying that English people were white. We have a weird setup now where multiculturalist state tries to make out, and indeed the BBC and all the rest of them try to make out that historically there were lots of people who were not white in England, but that's simply not true. And indeed, we've had more immigration in the last couple of years than in the 1,000 years before the Second World War. So, we are in a the situation in England is completely different to what it was. We're not a party that's particularly focusing on trying to exclude people. But having said that, we also don't want to have large numbers of people in this country who reject everything that we stand for in our culture and traditions.
Okay, thank you. Comprehensive answer there.
Can I give you an example of that? So
of course, yeah, go for it.
we've just been successful in bringing a judicial review to force the government to set up a statutory inquiry into the Pakistani Muslim child rape gangs and into the official collusion with those. We do not accept that communities that are willing to prey on white English working class children, basically, should be accepted as being part of our community. They don't want to be part of our community. They want to prey on English people, and they don't deserve consideration in response to that.
Well, thank you for that. That brings us on to the second part of the discussion tonight. So, Robin, are you a lawyer, solicitor, barrister? What's your specific job title? Sorry.
I'm a solicitor.
So Robin's a solicitor, and Robin has been successful. I'm just looking at an article here from March 2023, where Robin, you've represented one of these victims of these abuse scandals, and you can correct the article says a rapist convicted as part of a Rotherham grooming scandal has been ordered to pay £425,000 in damages to his victim by the High Court. You represented the victim in that case, so first of all, thank you. I'm sure anyone watching this is grateful for the work you've done in that. Could you, obviously, well, you know what you can say and what you can't say. Can you talk us through this case? And does this case, I know it was a couple of years ago, has it opened up more girls, more victims taking these animals to court, basically?
So the reason that I did that case pro bono was because what I was trying to do is to set out a sort of route map, as it were, or pathway, or break the ice, whatever you want to call it, to get people to see that actually the law could be used in this context. And I've been trying to do this for a while. When we had the J report reporting that at least 1,400 girls had been raped by these gangs and pimped and horribly ill-treated and tortured even. And people were starting to be convicted, or some of these perpetrators were starting to be convicted. What I thought was, it would just follow straight up, almost automatically, that the victims would sue the convicted perpetrators. After a year or so, I became surprised to see that none appeared to be doing that. So I thought that perhaps what I needed to do was to put in a normal type of advert, rather like you see for road traffic accidents, as my firm of solicitors, offering to represent girls that had been treated in this way. I tried to place that advert with the Rotherham Advertiser, which is a sort of yellow pages type. Well, not quite Yellow Pages, but it's a free paper that's distributed in Rotherham, and they refused to take the advert.
Really? Oh my goodness. And what excuse did they give for that?
They must have known about what was going on. I don't think you could be a journalist living in an area for years and have that going on around you and not know anything about it.
And why? Sorry, go on. Carry on.
I just thought that was pretty extraordinary and horrific that was the case, even at a sort of local paper level. I did challenge that as far as I could. I complained to the press complaints body. They said it was up to editors what adverts they took, and they weren't going to get involved in it. I have then spoken to people over the years since to try and persuade people that we needed to try and see if we could contact somebody who's willing to bring a case, who's one of the victims. In the case that you're referring to, we got an anonymity order, and the girl is known as Liz.
Yeah.
And she is a very brave person who's prepared to actually put her head above the parapet and bring this case. We also got, as well, before we let the perpetrator know what we were doing, we also got a freezing order, so he couldn't dispose of his assets. We then got the judgment, and we've now got a charging order over the house, and we're in the process of getting an order for it to be sold to pay compensation.
Fantastic. That is very good to hear.
People, the victims ought to be doing this, really.
Sorry to interrupt, but what is there ignorance on the part of the victims that they're just not aware of this?
It's sort of worse than that, as you would expect, with all that we're getting to see going on with the so-called grooming gangs, as the officials tend to call them. Because actually, it's sort of collusive. I've been told by several of the girls that they have been advised by local solicitors that you couldn't sue the perpetrators, whereas that is completely wrong. It has been the good law for a long time that you can sue for assault, rape, any other crimes that occur against you. Usually the only restriction on that is of course whether the person that's committed a crime against you is worth suing. In other words, whether they've got any assets,
any cash. So, sorry for my ignorance on this. Does someone have to be? Was this man? I can see that he was jailed in 2018. Do they actually have to be arrested and charged before taking civil proceedings, or does that not need to happen? Is basically what I'm trying to ask. Do they have to be charged with an offence?
So the position is this: that if somebody commits a crime against you, then you can sue them in the civil courts as well as get them prosecuted. If they have been prosecuted and convicted, that makes it a lot easier for you to sue them, because they're then not allowed to argue that they didn't do it.
Sure.
The civil courts won't allow that argument, and you're not allowed to argue anything that is part of your conviction. Didn't happen. You're not allowed to argue against that.
Sure.
Also, because of that rule, there's also a sort of supplementary rule that there isn't any time limitation, or it's much less. There can be problems with time limitation. It's perhaps too much to say there's none at all.
Sure.
But generally speaking, if you bring the case within a reasonable time after a conviction, you're going to be able to get around that. You will be able to sue. And so basically, where you've got a convicted rapist as in the case with Liz, where there were convictions for 2 rapes when she was, I think, 14. What that meant was that we could sue the perpetrator, and we were certain to get judgment, and did so. Really, the only argument that he could have had would be how much he should pay.
Well, this is going to be my next question. Do you have to put forward the amount you're suing for, or is that okay?
Yes, you do.
And how much was the 425? What you went for, or was it a higher figure?
That's what we went for.
Oh, lovely. That is good. So it's just fantastic to hear. It's just great to hear. Sorry, go on.
I can explain the logic behind that. So the first question is about the fact there is actually there have been rapes. Each rape, sort of rule of thumb figure, would be something like 30 to 35,000, without any further consideration about anything else. If it's then caused you any sort of psychological or physical harm, then that is on top of that sort of basic amount. In Liz's case, we got a medical report about her post-traumatic stress disorder and the impact it had on her life and her ability to earn over the course of her whole life, and got a forensic accountant to calculate that. And that's where we got to the figure of £426,000.
Okay, no, thank you for that. Final point on this, Robin. Anyone listening to this who has either been abused or knows someone in this situation, what would your advice to them to be if they want to pursue legal means in this regard?
Well, you're sort of rightly pointing to the question of whether or not they've been prosecuted and convicted. So obviously, if they've not been prosecuted and convicted, then it becomes much more difficult to sue. Mm-hmm. For a start, there's a limitation period, which would be 6 years after a person became adult, the victim, that is. And the underlying rationale behind that is that any longer period than that, and you're going to wind up with a situation where the perpetrator's not going to be able to produce witnesses to try and prove their innocence, and therefore there would be a degree of prejudice. That's the logic to it. I mean, I'm not commenting on whether I agree with that or not. But where they've been convicted in a criminal court, that whole argument goes away, and you're then back to what I was saying, that they're not allowed to argue anything about it not having happened or any prejudice or anything like that.
Yeah.
So I think the first recommendation I'd give to any girl in that position that you were talking about would be to make sure that they push and lobby as hard as possible to get the person prosecuted and convicted. Once they're convicted, they can then be sued. And it is worth bearing in mind that the reason why a lot of the Pakistani Muslim child rape gang members are worth suing is because, of course, they were making huge profits out of pimping these poor girls. I remember reading somewhere that the sort of estimated figure was something in the region of $250,000 a year.
Yeah.
And it is worth bearing in mind that the criminals are not just the gang members who forced them into this in the first place. They are also all their clients, as it were. You know, these men, who are also mostly Pakistani Muslim men, they were then paying to use these girls.
Yeah, yeah.
Every time that happened, that was a rape in law. And consequently, they can be sued as well. And very often, they are also property owners. So there is potential for a pretty dramatic change round in the situation here over and all profits being taken away from the criminals. I think that is an important step in the right direction. If we wind up getting to a point where the criminals were not thinking they were actually going to make any money out of it at all, I think that would remove some of the motivation.
Sure.
It wouldn't remove all of it. Yeah. We've seen in the Casey report, which I've been reading, very clear evidence that there are significant cultural and religious elements to the way that these people have been these men have been behaving towards white English girls who they regard with the utmost contempt.
The Casey report, we'll just touch actually before we do that, Robin. So, if anyone is watching this themselves or knows someone who has been successful at a criminal level, who would they contact to do what Liz has done in this instance? Would it be your organisation? Excuse me. Would it be your organisation? Would it be someone else?
Well, certainly, if they make contact with me, I will endeavour to try and make sure that they're able to bring a case.
Okay. Like I say, like I do with all my guests, I'll put a link to Robin's X account at the end. So yeah, anyone listening, if it applies to you, please do contact him. Like I said earlier, Robin, thank you so much for the work you've done in that regard. It's fantastic.
Well, it shouldn't have been necessary to trailblaze it, but I think it definitely was, and I think it matters that we were able to do that because people could now see that there is a pathway that makes that with a result that is definitely worth doing.
Absolutely. No, thank you.
And I think just finally, I'd say I think that Liz has felt not only encouraged about getting compensation, but she's also felt very much empowered in being able to get back at this man who
get her own back
used her so despicably when she was so young.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it can't take back what happened, obviously, but it's obviously much better than him getting away scot free. So no, it's fantastic.
And it's also worth we live in a people often comment that we live in a sort of society where the law has become very two-tier about things.
Yeah,
I think that is correct. But an instance of that is the man who had he was initially charged with 3 rapes, but he was convicted of 2 rapes of her as I say, I think a 14-year-old, but at any rate, certainly underage. She might have been 13 or 14, and for those convictions, he was sentenced to 9 years imprisonment. And it's worth bearing in mind what that actually means. So he served 4.5 years in total, of which the first 2 years, I think I'm right in saying, were served in a proper prison, and the last 2.5 years served in open prison, which is not really what the general public would think of as a prison. And I think the point to bear in mind is also that people who did things that the authorities didn't like, so those protesting violently about the Southport murders. So there was a young man, wasn't there, who was, I think, an apprentice, and somebody had set light to a wire basket with papers in it, and he pushed that against the fire door of one of the asylum hotels. As far as I'm aware, nobody was actually injured in any way. I don't think there was much damage even to the property. I think there's probably a bit of paint blistering, that sort of thing. Maybe those inside were alarmed at what happened, But the point that I'm making is that there wasn't any physical injury. And he got, I think I'm right in saying, 10 and a half years. And that was after an immediate plea of guilty. Whereas the perpetrator in Liz's case, he had pleaded not guilty. He put her through the whole ringer of the trial, and he had actually, raped her twice, as the conviction said, and yet he gets a lesser sentence.
It's absolutely disgusting. I had I don't know if you're aware of Mark Keith. I had him on last week to discuss his arrest for social media tweets.
Yes.
He was found innocent in the end, but a lot of I completely agree with what you're saying. I think Keir Starmer and the police last year just had a proper crackdown, and unfortunately, not condoning what the individual you've described did, but it doesn't warrant a 10-year jail sentence, obviously, and too many people, by the sounds of it, just repression.
If a child rapist,
Exactly.
a double
Yeah,
child
exactly.
rapist gets 9 years,
Exactly.
then certainly what he did was significantly less.
There's no comparison. There's no comparison.
I agree with you that what he did was wrong and a criminal act.
Yeah.
But it was obviously done in the heat of the moment, and he probably didn't mean as much by it as somebody who's actually committing a rape must mean.
No,
by
I
it.
completely understand. What my point is, there's no comparison between the two. Yeah, it's
It's worth bearing in mind that the system claims that if you plead guilty, you get a third discount.
you'd be treated better. Yeah, yeah. That was definitely wasn't the case
So
last
on the
year.
basis that he got 10 and a half years, obviously the court is in effect saying that if he hadn't pleaded guilty, he should have got several more years.
Has he? I don't.
Whereas the perpetrator I'm talking about in the Liz case,
Yeah,
he pleaded not guilty and fought the case.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
what the court is in effect saying there is that if he'd pleaded guilty, he wouldn't have got 9 years; he'd have got 6 years for two rapes.
Yeah.
Just absolutely disgraceful.
Completely agree. Completely agree, Robin. Thank you for that.
It sort of shows that it's important to bring the civil case because really, until you got the civil case, there isn't actually any proper punishment for the criminal.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. We're just sorry to move on. We'll move on to the third topic of the night just because time's not on our side. You mentioned earlier, Robin, about electoral politics with the English Democrats. So, from what I can see, if you want to do in inverted commas, right wing parties, reform seemed to be the only game in town. Now, do you? What would you say to people that would deem the English Democrats, if they stand against reform, as splitting the vote? It doesn't just go for the English Democrats; it could go for other smaller right wing parties. What would you say to those people?
Well, obviously that is a consideration and it's something that we've certainly been thinking about since reform sort of broke out of the pack, as it were. I think that one of the issues, of course, is where actually is reform on many things. So when it was pointed out that the white population, let alone the English population, was going to become a minority in the UK on current trajectory by about 2060, I think it was.
63. Yeah.
Richard I said, well, he'd be dead by then, and he wasn't that concerned. I paraphrase.
I know the clip. I know the clip you're referring to. Yes. Yeah.
That doesn't offer much comfort that he's really at all about patriotism and about the country. And we every now and again we get sort of similar comments. So Nigel Farage got interviewed, didn't he, a while back? And he basically said that first of all he didn't see it as practical to be looking at deporting all illegal immigrants, and we, by the way, have been saying we should deport all illegal immigrants, and we have a description that goes on the ballot paper which is English Democrats deport all illegal immigrants. He wasn't saying that was an ambition. He also said that reform couldn't be seen to be against Islam and Islamification. And of course, obviously he's lived up to that by plucking Zia Youssef out and appointing him as chairman, which hasn't been as much success as he thought it was going to be, I think.
Yeah.
But what he's doing is he's demonstrating there that he's very wobbly on where he is on the political spectrum. He's doing that for in some cases good reason, because what he thinks is that he needs to sort of eat into the centre ground, as people keep talking about in politics. So there is a case, I think, to say or to question whether Reform actually is a sort of patriotic party. And if it's not, and we're dealing with particularly with candidates who have a history of not being patriotic, then I would have thought it was pretty fair dues to stand against them.
So, if there was a general election tomorrow or next week, next month, would your party stand against? Would they stand against Reform?
So, can I just sort of remove the sort of hypothetical question in a way, because we got an electoral system. I mean, you're asking us to sort of, or you're steering the conversation towards trying to be realistic about the electoral system, whilst at the same time introducing a hypothetical question which couldn't possibly arise. So there's not going to be a general election before 2029. It is, we just don't know what the position's going to be then as far as Reform's concerned. At the moment, they're surging. And the opinion polls are becoming more and more encouraging from a Reform's point of view. I was reading an article in today's paper which was saying that on the latest opinion poll, Reform might actually have 400 MPs after a general election. But the article then went on to say that, of course, what's now being said in a fairly small sample of people might be true now, but in 3 months' time it might be completely different. And 3 months ago it might have been different still. In fact, the article finished up by saying that there was certainly quite a good chance that over the course of the next year that Reform will blow itself up. You've only got to look at what the really quite disgraceful behaviour in attacking Rupert Lowe and forcing him out, to see just what could happen. And then we've had the sort of flouncing around going on with Zia Youssef going out and then coming in again. That it's not a stable situation within Reform. The leadership is not stable and is very likely to say things that others feel that they can't put up with. So today we've had an announcement of bringing back the non-doms, in other words, foreign multimillionaires. Now, if you're a city trader, you might think that's a good thing, but I'm not totally sure that ordinary people in the red wall feel that that is what they really want to see happen. The special tax concessions to the super rich.
I take the point. It's a hypothetical, and it won't happen tomorrow, next week, whenever. But I do think it's a fair question, Robin. So, say in 2029, if Reform is as it is now, it's ahead of Labour, ahead of the Tories in all the polls. You've alluded to the opinion poll where they could get 300 to 400 seats. It might be ambitious. They could force a hung parliament, for example. I'm just curious. I'm just
Parliament is not going to save the country.
no, no. I'm just. But the question is, I'm just curious to know: would your party still stand?
We will take a decision about that, and that decision will be taken at the relevant time, seeing what's actually happened within reform and what they're then saying they're standing for. Because I mean, at the moment, reform is not in favour, even in an English Parliament. It's not in favour of recognising England.
Mm-hmm.
It's many of the things that they're talking about are things that I think many of our members would oppose.
Sure.
And a sort of failure to even take seriously the idea of deporting all illegal immigrants, I think does show a lack of resolve on one of the key issues of the day, which is this terrific mass. Also, likely the vast number of legal immigrants that have been unconditional leave to remain, which means that they're fully entitled to access all welfare benefits.
I would say that I do see your Farages, your Tices, they will comment on these things. They'll throw a bit of red meat. But when they're actually questioned about them, they will then back off and tone it down, like you say. So I don't know how their approach is going to change in the years to come, which way they're going to go in that regard.
Well, I've got another one for you, which I can personally vouch for. So when we were launching the judicial review to try and get the child rape gang ordered, inquiry into the child rape gangs ordered, Nigel Farage was offered to interview me about it, and we were going to talk about where we got to with the case. And he refused.
Really? Because he regarded, why would that be? Because he saw you as not politically advantageous? So what's your view on that?
I didn't get an explanation of it, but obviously he was basically not in favour of a case being brought to try and force the government to institute a statutory inquiry.
Well, that's very disappointing to hear. Very disappointing. That's obviously not in the public domain. So thank you for telling us that. Okay, thank you for that. We've got 10 more minutes, guys, approximately. I think it's been a really good chat. I really enjoyed the stream. If you do have any questions, now's your last chance to just chuck something in the chat. Very grateful for Robin's time tonight. Robin, another nice, easy topic now. The Middle East.
Yeah.
Can I get you and your thoughts on recent developments with America and Iran, and just a general overview of your thoughts with the Israel-Palestine conflict? And does your party take a neutral stance? Is it pro-Israel? Is it pro-Palestine? Just a general overview of your thoughts on the region.
So our approach is based upon English national interest. It's not. We're not necessarily going to be in favour of one or other. We're interested in English national interest being properly looked after. At the moment, that's not even being considered. We're getting comments being made which are only about the interests of other people, basically. And I don't think that's a proper way of approaching foreign affairs. But so far as Iran's concerned, it's one of those. It's not easy to come up with an answer if you're looking at it from our interests. So the first point to bear in mind is the American role in setting up the problem in the Middle East. It needs to be properly considered when you're considering whether or not what they're doing is sensible. So, I mean, after all, they staged a coup to place the Shah in charge back in the 50s. They then didn't support the Shah when he needed it in the late 70s. And the consequence was that there was then the Islamic Revolution. They've been not so keen on the Iranian Islamic Revolution ever since, because they regard the United States as the great Satan. So every now and again, they've done things to try and have a go at the Iranian government. One of the things that they were doing at one point was subsidising and supporting Saddam Hussein in fighting them. And then, of course, that all changed, and the Americans then destroy the regime that is the biggest threat and counter to the Iranian regime in the Middle East, namely attacking Iraq. The latest tergiversation we've had on that is we've had Donald Trump saying that the Iranians have got to be come back to the negotiating table to avoid being bombed again. But it is worth pointing out that they were actually at the negotiating table before they were bombed. American behaviour has been very sort of inconsistent and sort of, I think, probably worrying to anybody who, as we are, is within the area of the sort of American imperium, as it were. You know, we're not great power, and we are subject to American behaviour, which is often quite whimsical. But at the same time, and this is the sort of counterpoint, we don't really want a regime which talks about the absolute destruction of Israel and sets out to create all sorts of and support all sorts of terrorist groups to try and bring that about, having nuclear weapons. After all, the Israelis have got nuclear weapons, so if the Iranians got nuclear weapons and then use them against Israel, there'd be every chance that both Israel and Iran would be nuclear waste lands, and that we'd actually get ourselves into a situation where there was a nuclear exchange, and that could easily spread to many other countries. So I do think it's there's no easy answer there. In any case, it doesn't really matter what we think, I suppose, because Donald Trump didn't even consult Keir Starmer over it. He just went ahead and did it, therefore we're left with whatever emerges out of it, rather than having any role in deciding what should happen.
I think Trump's been very disappointing in this respect, because during his first term he was regarded as the anti-war president candidate, and he portrayed that in the last presidential election as well. So I mean, if you were being a real optimist, you would have thought the Russia-Ukraine war and the Israel-Palestine war started while he was out of office. Maybe he'd come back and things would change, but that's obviously not been the case, and it's very unfortunate.
Well, he's I think in his first term as well, he was very pro-Israel. And he's obviously following up on him being very pro-Israel with what he's doing now. And of course, what the Israelis have found in the last year or so is that, much to their surprise, I think their support for mass immigration from the Middle East into European countries has led to a situation where there are now very large numbers of people protesting about and against Israel. That's a policy, and that's rather backfired on them.
I was in London, the West End, at the weekend to go to the theatre, and outside on the streets there was a pro-Palestine demonstration, and it was the size of these things does astonish me. It's just never-ending seas of people. So I think Israel's definitely lost the what's the word I'm looking for? The propaganda war, the visual war, ethics war, whatever you want to call it. they've definitely lost that, I'd say.
Well, what's happened is that the demographics in European countries and especially in our country have changed, so that people like you and I are increasingly outnumbered in places like London. I think I'm right in saying that we're now at a point where the population of London is 65% non-white, let alone the numbers who regard themselves as English only. I think that was quite a relatively more than that, in fact. 9 million, I should think, on that basis. There's probably only 1 million people in London who would regard themselves as English only.
I take the point. It's definitely true. But I'd say even with the native population in England, in very basic terms, you used to say the left was pro-Palestine, the right was pro-Israel. I don't think that's as true on the right now as it used to be. I think access to social media and seeing what's actually going on in the Middle East has caused a lot of people who would have previously been of a certain age, let's caveat that, not the sort of boomers and the elderly, but the youngsters. They're seeing far more now of the Middle East, which they wouldn't have seen before, and they're either not pro-Israel, they're like more neutral, or they're doing a full 180 and taking the side of the Palestinians. So
I mean, I think you're right that is happening to some extent, but it may be more a question of media access than anything.
yeah, absolutely.
I mean, if you take, for instance, the fact that the recent demos have included support for Iran.
Yeah.
It is worth bearing in mind that if there was lots of images on YouTube and on social media of what's going on in Iran and the way that women are treated if they dare to take off the hijab and or sort of the burqa, and if they dare to express themselves as contrary to the mullahs, that they are hideously badly treated. If you had film of the treatment of gays and the execution of them, I think that might well lead to a situation where people were more equivocal about it. Because we've had the bizarre situation where there have been sort of gays, gay pride people protesting in favour of the Palestinians, and then as soon as the Palestinian people on the protest realised that these people are gay protesters, they've been told to get lost, haven't they?
Well, it's very because at the weekend, I know what you're saying. In the past, since October 7th, there have been those demonstrations would be rainbow flags and Palestinian flags, but at the weekend, I didn't see one rainbow flag, which was very very interesting because in the past there's always been a lot.
Gay Pride Month or something at the moment.
Yes, we are.
So I think what's happened there is that people on the left and who were campaigning on these various sort of identity issues thought that they were basically joining a group that was fully supportive of them and what they've been trying to do. Whereas in fact they're not. And the more awareness that occurs in the amongst the Muslim protesters of what these other groups are standing for, the less they're willing to tolerate having them there. It's the Iranian treatment of gays, I think, as an example. If people were sort of really focused on what's going on there, they would be much more nervous about supporting them. I saw an interesting exchange on Twitter between J.K. Rowling and a trans activist called India.
Yeah.
Who basically said that he was supporting Iran which she thought was highly amusing because obviously if the Iranians, mullahs, got hold of him, his life expectancy would be quite short.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not seeing that clip, but yeah, I can imagine J.K. Rowling's response to that.
Yes, she took no prisoners on that one. But, yeah, I mean, the trouble is, what we've now got is we're well beyond what people used to talk about with immigration, and people used to talk about equal treatment, being colourblind, about people and assimilation. But we've now moved into this world of state multiculturalism, and it is worth just contemplating for a moment or two where that comes from, because the state that most recently supported state multiculturalism openly as part of their doctrines was actually the Soviet Union. And they had a system whereby, if you were picked as a representative of a, inverted commas, community, that gave you all sorts of privileges. But of course, it was the centre that picked you. It wasn't actually your community that picked you. And what that meant, of course, was that the people who were supposedly the community leaders were beholden to the centre. And that was part of the sort of inner power structure of the Soviet Union. And the Soviet Union played this whole business of identity politics as part of maintaining the power of the centre. Going way back, the Romans used to refer to the tactic as being divide and rule. And so, we moved from a country where there was a homogeneous people who had fairly clear ideas about how things ought to be operated, and the state had relatively little discretion, because obviously it couldn't really do what everybody thought was wrong, to a situation now where there's lots of interest groups and identity groups and so on, and they are basically trying to play one off against another in order to maintain the power of the state, and that is what state multiculturalism actually amounts to. And it's a very bad situation for our people to be in, as we've discovered so very clearly, given as an example with the whole issue of the way in which the authorities, the media, and everybody else were behaving about the child rape gangs. Because only up until a couple of weeks ago, anybody mentioning it was being called both a liar and racist, as happened with Rupert Lowe when he was interviewed by Emily Maitlis.
Yeah, her attitude in that interview was disgusting, and it's exactly that sort of attitude is why so many girls suffered. Was part of the reason, at least.
Yeah, but she was giving voice to a very typical set of views of the liberal,
the elites,
multiculturalist elite.
Yeah, absolutely. Robin, thank you very much for your time tonight. I hope those were 4 interesting topics that people listened to. Yeah, like I said, apologies everyone for the issues at the start, and this has been an audio-only stream, but I hope you have enjoyed it. Robin, where can people find you on social media?
So on Twitter, I am at Robin Tilbrook. And there's also the English Democrats at English Democrat, and at the Workers of England Union at Workers of England, and of course the Workers of England Union is basically the only union that would stick up for you if you you found yourself being cancelled at work. And we reckon to provide, and we do provide, a proper professional service for our members, rather than being ideological about it. But we do support people of the right who get into trouble, who are our members. There's also the website, which is englishdemocrats.party, or for the Union, Workers of England .co.uk.
Perfect. Thank you very much for that, Robin. I'll put some of those links in the chat afterwards. Right, if you hold the line, Robin, I'll just have a quick chat with you. I'll finish off here, and we'll have a quick chat and then have the rest of our evening. So thanks everyone for listening to that. If you've enjoyed it, please give it a like, subscribe if you're new to the channel, and yeah, I'll try and have a new guest next Monday. Thanks very much for listening all. Cheers.